Hi everyone, welcome to CoinBundle Conversations, where we tell you the story behind the leading entrepreneurs and investors in the blockchain space so that you know which projects to back and get behind. So today I'm very excited to welcome my good friend KJ Erickson, who's the CEO and founder of Public Market. She's going to tell you about her journey as an entrepreneur and Public Market and what she wants to achieve with that. So KJ, thanks for joining us.
Yeah,
Welcome.
It's so good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So KJ, I'd love to hear about how you got interested in entrepreneurship. I know you started your first organization when you were 20, which is amazing. So we'd love to hear about your story and how you got into technology and entrepreneurship.
Yeah, it's interesting now that I call myself a tech entrepreneur, because growing up I wasn't interested in technology in particular. I think technology for me very much became a means to an end. But when I started as an entrepreneur, it was very much about solving real problems for real people, and I've always been attracted to economics and creating more sustainable economic systems. So when I was in college, I was at Stanford studying public policy and economics, and became really passionate about how do we improve the living conditions for some of the world's most poor people. So I ended up starting an NGO, a non-governmental organization or a nonprofit that worked in refugee camps and post-conflict zones on the African subcontinent. And that was my entree into foundership, right? By the time I was 22, I had 200 employees in war zones and some of the most insecure environments. Real training, by fire, right? Just being thrown into the deep end.
So that's amazing. Like, how did a 22-year-old here in Palo Alto decide to go to Botswana and war zones? How did that happen?
Yeah, I was really lucky to have parents that invested in travel, right? Like, we didn't spend our money on much more besides experiences. And so that was a lot of camping when I was a kid. And then my parents saved up for some really big trips when I was in high school. And one of them was to Kenya, just on a picture safari. But it was that trip that really, put my worldview on its head. Seeing extreme poverty, seeing kids who had to struggle so hard to get an education. Maybe that's walking 10 miles without shoes on their feet. Whereas I'd grown up in an environment where we were pushing kids to care about school, right? And so that was when you're in that sensitive 16, 17-year-old age, and you see kids your age that have such different experiences than you. It's a very naive impulse to want to change that, and yet that idealism that I think so many of us founders have as kind of a core impulse turns out to be really powerful, because it enables us to take risks and do things that most people would say are completely unrealistic, right? Because they really are. And you look back and you're like, oh wow, if I was wiser, I wouldn't have started that thing. Yeah. But then I wouldn't have had that impact, and I wouldn't have changed my own life and my own capacities in all these ways.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing that you picked yourself up and moved there and did all of this amazing work, because often I find there's a disconnect between Silicon Valley and what's happening on the ground in Kenya and Tanzania and Rwanda.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that for me, one of the things that we talked about before was what are some of the most impactful moments in your career? And for me, so many of those are getting out of the bubble of Silicon Valley or of an urban city where people are well off, and being amongst the real world and real people and how they live, and solving problems for them rather than solving problems for the classic press a button, have your laundry done. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. So now you're a 22-year-old, you've started this company. What does this company do, and how did you take it forward for the next few years?
Yeah, so after my sophomore year at Stanford, I'd volunteered in a refugee camp in Botswana with a student group. And it was during that time that I saw just how broken basically the international system for how we manage refugees is, because it was set up, in the 50s, post World War II, in a time we thought refugees were just a short-term problem. They were there for 6 weeks at a time. So it's purely the UNHCR, functions as a humanitarian organization. They can provide food and shelter, and they don't have budget for much more than that. So this is, where my idealistic self came in and said, whoa, if refugees are actually here for 9 years on average, we need more schools, we need job training programs, we need ways so that refugees are taking advantage of the time they're spending in the camp rather than languishing, so that when they do ultimately go home, they can contribute to their home countries and environments rather than just being a major economic drain. So that was the work that we did. We did schools, libraries, a lot of computer training. We built the first internet cafe in a refugee camp in the world. We did a lot of microfinance and agricultural finance, which is one of the only forms of microfinance that doesn't flood a job market.
Right.
And various things beyond that.
That's amazing. And I really admire kind of the strong sense of wanting to help people. That's kind of like a stream that flows throughout your career.
Yeah, I think to me, what I'm most passionate about is economic empowerment and economically sustainable systems, right? And we see a lot of ways in our current macro economy that are really broken for the people at the bottom, right? And so much of my journey as an entrepreneur has been in testing out different approaches to solving it. And I think we do need to address them on a lot of different levels, right? I think that nonprofits that serve the poorest of the poor are really critical, but I also think that experimentation around alternative economies, which is what I got into next, are super important for how do we create alternative income streams that's parallel to the normal economy. And then the stuff that I'm working on now, which is actually about, is there a way to break kind of the mass corporatism in these few but extremely powerful monopolies that are really dominating the entire economic environment and raising prices for everybody and making it just harder to get by as a normal person.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So now tell me, so you've set up this organization, you're setting up schools, you're helping tens of thousands of people, you've had tremendous impact. How did you decide to move on to your next adventure? And tell me about that transition.
Yeah, I would start by saying that when I was in high school, I told my mom that I wanted to be a nonprofit entrepreneur, right? We didn't have the term social entrepreneur yet. Because I had this frame that is how you create impact, is it has to be nonprofit. It didn't take many years of actually running a nonprofit to realize that there's a lot of problems with that frame, right? It is very, very hard to scale solutions that depend on philanthropic dollars, right? It's not actually in our DNA to give that much money, especially to causes that you can't see, right? So that was part of how I got into technology, was trying to be like, okay, how do I get people to care about something that's happening on the other side of the world with people that don't look like them and don't talk like them, right? So at Forge, my nonprofit, we actually created the first crowdfunding platform that lived within an individual organization in the world. So this is right at the time that Kiva was starting. We launched forgenow.org, a way that you could choose from many of our 25 different projects that we had going on, and there were videos and there's images and there's stories, and we made sure that we gave report backs on impact metrics every month. That's awesome. Right? And so that was like how I start caring about technology is, again, as a means to an end. And yet, you don't scale philanthropic dollars that easily. And so I became extremely frustrated, not just by the scaling issues, but also by the waste and the corruption that exist in the humanitarian realm. And over time, I was kind of given a natural opportunity to transition out of that work. We'd moved most of our work into the Democratic Republic of Congo, which was a highly unstable environment in which we weren't able to keep our employees safe, and we had murder attempts on our staff, and we were held at gunpoint, and there was just increasing instability. So we had to evacuate our staff and basically desert our programs in the middle of the night in 2010, and that became the time in which I got to step back and ask myself, like, okay, is this what I want to keep going with? Because it in some ways it requires starting afresh, or is it time to explore, different mechanisms to creating the kind of change I want to create in the world.
That's great. So then you moved back. Did you move back to the Bay Area after that?
Yeah. We always had a headquarters here for fundraising and management. So I always spent at least half my time in the Bay Area. But I took a break for a year and I moved back up to Sonoma County, which is where I grew up. It's just an hour north of San Francisco, and opened a yoga studio. Oh, wow. Right? Like after this large international complex organization, like the simplicity of a local business, right, with like 2 employees, was really beautiful. But it also provided what I mentioned before, right? It was like kind of this recalibration to how do most people live? Like getting out of the San Francisco bubble, right? This is a normal blue collar town. And it was post downturn, right? This is 2011. And I'm just running this local business that anybody can, walk in the door of. And so that to me became the inspiration for the next set of work that I did, because actually with this yoga and dance studio, we ended up making more money in trade and barter than we were clearing in profit on the studio every month, because people would walk in the door and say, look, it's hard for me to afford yoga, but I could really use it. Is there any chance you want a carpenter and trade for work or a massage? Or could I work behind the front desk or help you paint the studio? And when you have excess capacity in a local business, you just say yes, right? And so I got to see the way that trade was this massive underground economy that, of course, doesn't really get reported, right? Nobody really wants to pay taxes on that. And yet, especially in times when the economy is slow and liquidity is poor for your average individual, especially the freelancers and contractors, they turn to barter and trade, right? And so I just, because I had a history in technology, and we haven't really talked about how I got introduced to technology, but basically I was an entrepreneur in residence for one of the first web incubators in the Valley, right? Same time that Y Combinator was starting up. And my job was to build and to test out, new internet solutions, right? And it was a beautiful time in the internet, 2007, when it felt like you had this tabula rasa, right? We were still experimenting with social networks. Like we could create a new social network, right? That's insane nowadays. But I got to learn all these skills about how to create and launch web products that then made a whole ton of sense when I saw this underground economy that nobody had built a marketplace to facilitate, right? And it came time that I was trading for pretty much every kind of service you could imagine, but nobody had walked through the door yet and asked if I wanted to trade for a haircut, right? And so I went to the internet, and of course expecting it to have solved it, and it hadn't. And so that's where the original rumblings behind the idea for my next company, Simbi, came into being, which is let's build a marketplace for things that people don't have enough money to provide, primarily services that they otherwise would barter and trade for, but then let's add a currency layer on top of it so that I don't have to trade directly with you, right? You can pay me in credits, and then I can use that to get the thing that I want to get.
Yeah, so that's where we first met, when you were taking Simbi through Y Combinator and I was doing Y Combinator as well. Exactly. And looking back at what you were doing with Simbi, you were already had a currency on the platform. Exactly. You were way ahead of all of these projects that are now tokenizing things and using their native currencies. So in some ways you were way ahead of the curve with Simbi.
I mean, certainly in terms of thinking about how alternative currencies can be applied to solve real world problems for real world people, absolutely, and learning how to really manage an economy, right? And how to, I mean, I think one of the coolest things that I learned with Simbi is just really how do you embed values, philosophies, and even a set of kind of expected behaviors into a currency. Because I think that, you know, even though you can use any type of, say, cryptocurrency to pay for something, it actually does mean something different to ask to be paid in ETH than it does to be paid in Bitcoin, you know, in these slightly different ways where you develop different cultures. And you can embed that into the great thing about the blockchain space is that, you know, no successful crypto is just a blockchain with a digital asset on it. Right. It's a community built around it with a set of ethos, with a set of philosophies. And I think that that's really special, something that we really focused on with Simbi, because what kind of behaviors come out of that and how people use that currency. Yeah, and
I was a user of Simbi, and I saw that there was this sense of values and community that you adhered to by participating in the community. So what were some of the values which you were promoting as part of that community?
Yeah, I think that, you know, really the core values are how do we support each other in getting our needs met in ways that aren't happening in the traditional economy. Right. And so there's this like form of kind of collaboration, and we're in this together, that you'd see again these very different behaviors. So something that you might charge $200 for in the real world, like you might only charge $50 worth of credits for in Simbi, if it's somebody that you want to support, right? If it, like, you're going to pay attention to all these other different sets of values and who you want to work with, the type of work you want to do, right? It's unlikely in Simbi that you're going to be providing things that you don't actually enjoy doing, right? And so there's also that set of values around how do we want to spend our time, right? Doing things that we care about in a way that makes a meaningful difference in real people's lives, and often that are really building up skills that empower us for the future to be building the kind of lives that we want to build. Because so many people are stuck in desk jobs that they hate and yet have these passions on the side. And so many people use Simbi to test out the things that their dreams, right? Like, I really want to be a painter, but is anybody really going to care about my art? You know, well, maybe I'll put some on Simbi and see. And then you build that confidence, and that can be such a powerful thing.
Yeah, and it's very empowering and liberating for people to do what they always wanted to do.
Yeah, exactly. And also to receive things that they would never be able to afford otherwise.
Awesome. So you've built Simbi, you've gone through the most prestigious incubator in the world, Y Combinator, you're growing Simbi to tens of thousands of people. When did you start thinking about the blockchain space, or thinking that would be?
I mean, so of course, running a company that has its own currency, I've been paying attention to blockchain for a while, and one of the questions was always whether we take our credits and put them on the chain, right? Do we tokenize? And I've got reasons why I don't think that's the best idea. But I really went deep into exploring that, and as I went deep into exploring it, I first of all became pretty dispassionate about what I see as a lot of projects that try to shove a token into a pre-existing thing as a way to raise money, right? And how poorly that works. But I became extra passionate about the way that you can build networks around a token in a truly pure play way, that really capture the value of a network at the token level, right? Rather than, and I think that's something really beautiful about the blockchain space, is that so many projects are nonprofits or foundations, right? That they're fundamentally open source, and there's entirely new forms of, call them business models, or enterprises that you can take on when you're starting from that slate, right? This is a nonprofit. It's centered around a token. It requires a token to organize its behaviors. but it isn't dependent on, the private corporation model, which is discounted future cash flows, right? Literally, how much profit am I taking out of an ecosystem? When you build a network around a token or in a nonprofit environment, you can say, look, this thing doesn't ever need to take profits out of the ecosystem. And that leaves, from an economic efficiency perspective, my passion, that leaves a whole lot more on the table for the network participants that are actually creating the value, because it has to go to those individuals. And so I became really passionate about that. Obviously, running a marketplace myself, became really passionate about that as a potential solution for what I think is a really broken business model of marketplaces, right? Simbi is fundamentally a commission-free marketplace. We are not saying, okay, we created this infrastructure that allows people to connect and to transact, but we're not trying to take a cut in the middle. And that's best for everybody. But the same thing had not been solved for more of the goods-based economy, for e-commerce, right? And the e-commerce space, I think, is incredibly fascinating and under-attended to in just what is happening there with the rise of the major monopoly middleman, right? And I think I hate the term e-commerce because it sounds like niche. It sounds like just another industry, right? But when you think, remove the E from that, we're talking about commerce. We're talking about most of the economy, right? This is how people, so many other industries are just contained inside of commerce. And as e-commerce is rapidly eating regular commerce, and in 10 years there's going to cease to be a meaningful distinction, right? And probably the stuff even that you buy at the corner store is going to somehow be bought online and in all these kind of mashed up ways, as China's already way ahead of us in that regard. That this, all of a sudden now we have this fundamental way of humans transacting value that one private corporation is starting to sit in the middle of, right? And that's Amazon in the US, right? And it may be different in different countries, but this has only been enabled by the internet, right? If you think about how commerce was done historically, right? And commerce has always been a public good, right? If you go back to ancient Greece, right? The agora was this public market that is supported by the infrastructure. The city invests in a place for people to meet, buyers and sellers to transact value. And it would be absurd to imagine that there was some kind of middleman charging a transaction fee on every single purchase that was done at a public market, right? But the way that the internet arose, the fact that when you're talking about asynchronous purchase and delivery points, all of a sudden you need a protection mechanism, right? Buyers need to be protected from sellers and vice versa. And you also need a connection mechanism. You literally just need a way to discover what's available to be bought and sold, and some sort of assurances of the quality of those goods in that seller. And so because we didn't have alternatives in 1995, when these marketplace platforms were starting, this public market function all of a sudden got filled by private markets, right, of Amazon and eBay, et cetera. And because those were fundamentally private corporations that had to fundraise from investors that were expecting discounted future cash flows as how they invest, their business model then becomes extractive. It's fundamentally, okay, we're going to sit in between, and then we're going to take a commission. And it's not just a commission that covers the costs of doing this. It's a major profit center. Right? Even eBay now still makes, and they're only 7% of e-commerce. They make $8 billion off of commission fees, and Amazon makes 30-something billion off of commissions on third-party sales, right? You selling to me, you shipping to me, or paying separately for shipping, right? And then paying the platform anywhere between 10 and up to 40% inclusive of commissions and fees.
So I guess the analogy is, say if we go to a shopping mall and buy a t-shirt, the shopping mall says, hey Saad, you have to pay 40% extra on this t-shirt just for the privilege of shopping in my mall, we would be outraged.
Exactly. And that's precisely it. That would never happen, because those sellers would figure out, okay, well, we're going to sell right outside the mall for cheaper. And so this is actually the biggest, I think, hoodwink of marketplace e-commerce is Amazon cares so much about you believing that they are the cheapest place to buy something.
Right.
However, when they've got these commission fees that sellers are inherently adding to the cost of their good, right? They're not the cheapest place. Like if I knew that I could just go to your website and buy a $10 book for, $6, I would do that. So Amazon knows that, and they put in their seller contracts these clauses called price parity. And price parity says, cool, you want to sell on Amazon, you want access to, our buyers, you can't sell cheaper anywhere else.
Wow. Okay.
Right? And so then that's how they maintain the illusion of them being the cheapest place that you can buy from.
And this is obviously a problem now, but it seems like as Amazon is crowding out the market, once Sears and Macy's go out of business, then people won't have any other options, right?
Exactly, right. So the growth of Amazon sales is rapidly outpacing the growth of e-commerce sales, and even growth of e-commerce is growing really fast, right? But they're just progressively taking over more and more of the market. They're at like 44% now of all online sales go through Amazon, and they're going to be at 50% in 2021.
So KJ, you identified this amazing, massive, growing problem. Tell me about public market and how it solves it.
Yeah. So the design challenge for me and my team, and I've got two amazing co-founders that have been in e-commerce as very successful entrepreneurs since 1995 and 2002 respectively. But it was, how do you take the advantages of the network effects that made these platforms really powerful? How do you maintain those advantages for consumers while removing the opportunity for any part of the marketplace stack to be monopolized, right? Because it's the monopolization that drives these outsized rents that lead to higher prices for consumers. And so the way that we're doing that is that we're basically taking all of the data sets that lie under the hood of a private marketplace and recreating those in an open, transparent, public format, right? So we're building network effects in a way that provides consumers with value, but we're doing that outside of a private corporation. And we're allowing anyone to build on top of those network effects or take advantage of them. So the way that we do that is that we're creating a massive public inventory database. So imagine that you could take all the inventory that Amazon manages and eBay manages and Rakuten manages and combine those into one data set that anyone can help you sell onward, right? And along with that, we also need data sets on the seller's actual reputation, right? Think their eBay feedback score that anyone can then embed onto that website that they're helping to sell these products on, as well as a bunch of product metadata like images and descriptions. Once you have these data sets recreated in an open source public way, that's basically our public market protocol. All of a sudden, creating what we now think of as a marketplace becomes very trivial, right? So if you think about Shopify, which allows you to very easily create beautiful, compelling marketplace interfaces online, what we're allowing is for anyone to create a Shopify-like store from their living room in their underwear while accessing all of the inventory that third-party sellers are willing to sell onward for them, not have to deal with any kind of the logistics, fulfillment, returns, not have to deal with any of the customer support, because these are all handled by the sellers, but communicated through our protocol. And so their only job at the application layer is to sell these products onward, right? To reach buyers. So you imagine who's in the best position to reach buyers. It's people who already have an audience or who have skills in reaching an audience. So it may be influencers who previously had to do affiliate marketing, which is a crappy experience for everybody, and also pretty low margin. It is those who previously had been affiliate marketers, and it's those who have talents in marketing in general and reaching a buyer audience that people want to trust their curation skills, right? So if people are like, wow, Saad is, really knows what kind of checkered shirts I should buy, you can, in an instant, create a checkered shirt marketplace that's built on our platform. It looks like a vertical version of Amazon. The buyer experience is the same. They're getting their goods at the same, delivery speeds. But you've now launched a business, and we've basically decentralized the application layer while keeping these data layers underneath as kind of this pooled resource that's open source and ultimately decentralized.
That's great. So it's giving a lot of people access to the same competitive advantage, which right now is kept within Amazon, which it charges a fee for.
Exactly.
So do you expect people who use the application and build stores on top of it, do you expect them to be aggregators and selling a lot of different products or single products?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a combination of a lot of different business models, right? That's the beauty of this, is right now you only have, one interface to access, e-commerce stuff on Amazon. But I think that what this does is enable the beauty of capitalism, which is innovation and competition and a lot of different business models. So we are building a flagship application on top of this protocol that's horizontal. It looks like a prettier but probably earlier version of Amazon that you can access millions of inventory items. But other people will experiment in verticalized, or they'll experiment in just marketing to an audience of pet lovers, et cetera.
And so for an average consumer who's watching this video, do you expect them to go on your website and buy, or will they be using the protocol without finding out about it in the background?
Right, good question. We enable both, right? So we enable that they could certainly go on our flagship application, which will be at public.market, and buy stuff. But they'll also be able to buy through this kind of decentralized federated network. Some of those websites will decide to show that they're using the public market protocol and give the buyers access to rewards from that protocol. But some will choose to have it running in the background and not have the consumer, right? That's part of the kind of experimentation and competition process.
That's great. So KJ, a lot of our viewers are really interested in tokens and different currencies. So tell us about your token. What does it do? How will it interface with the store that people go and shop in?
Yeah, we're really excited about our token because the way it works in our ecosystem is pretty unique. Basically, the tokens work as cash back points or credits that buyers earn on every single purchase, right? And the beauty of creating this fundamentally commission-free protocol is that all of a sudden there's a whole lot of margin left on the table from these third-party sellers who are otherwise paying these commissions. And so what we do is we basically give that commission back to the buyers in the form of our tokens, our patron tokens, on every single purchase that they make. And so they're earning anywhere between 10 and 30% cash back points on every sale in cryptocurrency.
That's great. So instead of me buying on Amazon and not paying a higher price, I can go buy on public market and both get a better price and get back some commissions.
Yeah, you will. So you may get a better price, or you may pay the same dollar-based price and get a bunch of rewards points back.
Awesome. And then what would I do with those reward points, or how can I utilize the tokens in other places?
Yeah, so one of the things that the rewards points we plan to earn you access to is as a membership in a very similar thing to Prime, our version of that, where you get free 2-day shipping on eligible items. But ultimately, and this comes, after we have a money transmitter license or a money transmitter partner, you'll just be able to use those tokens in our ecosystem to buy stuff or, buy gift certificates. So that's obviously the plans for the network.
That's awesome. And so it's great that some of the learnings and findings that you had with the Simbi token and Simbi currency, you're able to apply that to public market as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Great. So now just, I know we are circling back a little bit, but tell me about blockchain. Explain blockchain like you would to a 5-year-old.
Yeah, so obviously the shorthand description for blockchain is always distributed ledger technology, but a 5-year-old would have no idea what that means. The way I like to describe it is, you think about a world where we were just paying each other in physical cash or coins. We always knew who owned any particular coin, right? It's like whoever has it in their pocket. Yeah. Once we entered a digital world, we lost the ability to track who owns a digital item. Because when you think about, if I have a picture on my cell phone that I'm sending to you, all of a sudden we both have a copy. So who had the last one? Who's the actual owner of that, right? We were not able to solve that problem in the digital world without using some intermediary who said, well, according to my database, that you don't have access to, I believe that Saad had that picture last. What blockchain has done is actually, for the first time, given us a way without using an intermediary to know who has a digital asset. But I think an easier way to think of it is who has a dollar bill or a coin, right? And also, where has that dollar bill or coin been in the past in a way that that you can trust, that you can follow this immutable history of where that coin has been.
There's been a lot of, obviously, consumer interest and excitement around investing in cryptocurrencies. How do you think people should evaluate which projects they should invest in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's such an important question, right? Because crypto is very high risk asset class, no matter what. But I think that, using this very similar principles to old school investing, right? Like paying attention to the team, paying attention to the product, their skills, obviously, like who else is backing them and the trustworthiness of those sources, and then really looking at their progress. I think that one of the ways that you see how young this industry is the fact that so many teams are raising so much money without delivering a product, right? Just on a white paper. So I'm a big believer that you can't really judge something until you see a team actually ship. Yeah. And so obviously there's some space in anybody's portfolio for things that are more speculative and that haven't shipped product yet, but I would be paying a lot of attention into what the team is actually shipping. Yeah. And then how that token works in that ecosystem. Is it kind of crammed in and non-essential, or is it really key and fundamental to the operation of the environment?
Right, and that's something which we really want to help users understand, because traditionally there were venture capitalists whose whole job was to study industries and invest in projects based on their expertise, and now we are entering this phase where anyone can make that decision, which is both empowering and really risky. Right. So how do you think people, what advice would you give your uncle who wants to invest in cryptocurrencies, or how should they think about this space?
Yeah, I mean, I would say part of it depends on your risk tolerance, and part of it depends on how much you have to lose, right? So first things first is get really clear on how much money you're willing to lose, and then decide, just like you would construct any other portfolio, how much risk you want to put in different baskets, right? So if you're like, well, you know what, I've got $1,000 that I don't really care, and if I'd rather take a 1% chance that it goes to the moon, than a 50% chance that I get it to $2,000. Right. Then fine, invest in ICOs that you vetted, et cetera, right? Invest in these low market cap coins that you have good reason to believe that they're on an upswing. But if you want to be more conservative with it or balance out your portfolio, balance that out with Bitcoin, right? Yeah. And maybe some of the other kind of top 10 market cap coins. But do your research. Even in the top 10, some are way, I think, riskier than others.
Great. And so, KJ, final question. What are the next steps for public market? Do you have any big announcements coming out?
Yeah, I mean, we're actually in a pretty exciting position because we've been working on this in stealth for over a year. So we've got a product that's extremely far along and a set of partnerships for inventory, right, for sellers that still almost blows my mind. So the next things that you'll see from our team, and definitely join our Telegram channel, is actually releasing a product that will have a whole ton of utility and also just be, I think, one of the most beautiful and usable consumer products that the blockchain space has yet to see, because it fits into a normal person's daily behaviors and yet makes it better.
Great. I'm really excited to see the launch, and thank you once again for joining us. This has been a wonderful conversation, and looking forward to seeing public market take on Amazon.
Thank you so much for having me.